Hi, and thank you for tuning in today. My name is Seth Gerson, and I'm Program Director for K-12 Education here at the National Governors Association. Welcome to our webinar today with Education Resource Strategies on Strategic School Staffing and Restructuring Educator Roles to be more collaborative and team-based and to better impact students. Education Resource Strategies empowers school system leaders to make transformative shifts in resources, structures, and practices so that all students, especially those with the greatest learning needs and those furthest from opportunity, attend a school where they can learn and thrive. They partner with school district teams, expand leaders' knowledge and skills, and share lessons and tools with the field. Since 2005, ERS has worked with the leaders of more than 150 school systems in several states through data, design, and implementation. Please note that this recording is the latest in NGA's state snapshots for strengthening the educator workforce webinar series. Please check out earlier webinars in this ongoing series, including with Dr. Jason Grissom, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, Dr. Constance Lindsay, Dr. Paul Manna, Dr. Steve Tozer, Dr. Bonnie Fusarelli, and the National Center for Grow Your Own. These webinars are supported by and in partnership with the Wallace Foundation. The Wallace Foundation works to support principal and school leader preparation, development, and support across the country. Their resources, reports, and research on state strategies for school leadership can be found at wallacefoundation.org or through a direct link on the NGA K-12 webpage. Today, I'm honored to be joined by the team from Education Resource Strategies, Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Karen Hawley Miles, and partner, Dr. Ventura Rodriguez. For today's webinar, the ERS team will present a snapshot of strategic school staffing, models underway across the country that are showing impact, and how governors and states can help support these efforts. With that, I'll turn to the ERS team for their presentation. Thank you both for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Ventura and I are so glad to be able to share this time with you and talk about the teaching shortage and what the state role might be. You will see the title of this presentation, which is rather unwieldy, Why Addressing the Crisis in Teaching Requires State Action and is about so much more than salary. And the reason we're starting here is because with Seth and the National Governors Association's help, we've looked across the country at what governors are saying about the teacher shortage. And what we see, what we notice is a variety of different strategies, but almost all of them focus primarily on teacher compensation and mostly on teacher salary. And they're doing so mostly in pretty traditional ways, talking about needing to raise compensation, talking about needing to do for all teachers and so on. And so one of the things we want to talk about today is how it's about so much more. Salary is absolutely key, but wielded on its own and unstrategically, it is very expensive, and we would argue not all that effective. Of course, we all know that teachers are the biggest factor in non-school factor in student outcomes, but also you all are very aware that K-12 teachers make up the largest single profession in the United States and in many of your states. And many of the cities we work in too, K-12 employees are the largest group of employees in the city. So it's not just an education outcome story, it's an economic question for your states. I put this quote up from the National Center of Education Statistics, which looks very familiar, raising questions about the attractiveness of the teaching profession. I put it here because this came from March 1993, a full 30 years ago. So we have had this challenge for absolutely decades. And we would argue that the part of the reason we haven't been able to get out of this challenge is that we haven't been thinking about the teaching profession and the teaching job holistically. And that what we need to do to change for the future is do so. We all know, and this data comes from our partners at Educators for Excellence. They do an annual survey. And this found that just 16% of teachers would recommend teaching to a friend. and only 1 out of 3 believe their school meets the needs of their most vulnerable students. So why reimagine the teaching job? We know student outcomes require excellent teaching, but the basic centuries-old structure of the teaching job, which is isolated, rigid, static, makes it much more difficult to keep teachers and generate the positive student outcomes that we need. We basically are asking educators to excel in spite of, not because of the systems that they work in. We expect educators to work independently and address broad and deep student needs that go far beyond academics now. And when you compare teaching to other 21st century professions, you can see why we struggle to attract and retain enough great educators. They have rigid jobs. They have to be in school every single day, unlike most professions where you get to work remotely. And their jobs are inflexible and stay the same over the years. Teacher turnover is a huge challenge, destabilizing school communities, undermining instructional improvement, and cutting short student relationships with caring adults. It's particularly challenging in high poverty schools. And we were able to analyze in great detail data from across 9 large urban school districts. And we have found that teacher turnover, this is annual turnover, has increased since 20 and 21, and that it is highest in high poverty schools, almost 50% higher in high poverty schools. So turning over 29% of your teachers every year, thinking about that, what it means for a school community, what it means for collegiality, what it means for teaming, what it means for when you're investing in professional development for teachers. And 1/3 of the teachers you invested in supporting leave that next year. It has huge consequences on the quality of teaching. We've done a lot of work across the country doing surveys and meeting in focus groups with teachers to be able to say, what is it that we should be organizing in order to enable? What would a wonderful teaching job look like? And we are finding a lot of resonance with these 5 words, that it should be dynamic, it should be rewarding, it should be collaborative, sustainable, and diverse. But if you look at the right-hand column here, you see this doing these things requires something that looks quite different. There would be much more role flexibility, less time on instructional duties, and opportunities to play leadership roles. We would pay teachers competitive with other like professions, and we would increase compensation based on roles and responsibilities. We would actually have teams that were supported by experts who knew more than many of the people on the teams and who helped guide people to learn more. We would have a workload and schedule that enables teachers to focus on teaching. And we would have many more ways to get into teaching and to identify high potential candidates to do that. And we would be much more systematic with those on-ramps into teaching, and much more systematic about supporting new teachers when they get in. We would argue that one of the reasons we don't get to this vision is that we haven't created an integrated, comprehensive vision of what the teaching job needs to look like. And this chart has a lot on it, but it starts with a fundamental premise that we need teams of educators who share the combination of their experience and their expertise, and who support each other in the shared work of teaching. A lot of your states are doing work on the ends of this chart, working on different ways into teaching, working on new teacher residencies, and maybe on the far end, working on adding teacher leadership roles as part of your state policy or part of the work you're doing. But many of you are not working on the centerpiece here, the green, which is the core of the job. What is compensation, and what are those career roles that teachers and educators can move through over time as they gain responsibility and expertise? What does the daily work of teaching actually look like? Do teachers have 150 kids in core subjects that they're supposed to know at the secondary level? And do they have time to reflect in between meetings and to plan together? Do they have time to meet and engage with students individually and to connect with families? And are they engaged in professional learning that supports the work that they're doing every day and the things that they need to learn specifically? And is there time for doing that? We would argue that these things are often not addressed in the middle. And if the things are addressed, they're often addressed in silos with different pieces of legislation that don't fit together to translate into a school design or school organization that actually looks fundamentally different and creates a sustainable, rewarding, collaborative, flexible, and diverse teaching job. On average, K-12 salaries are 30% lower than other professions that require a bachelor's degree. And this is a natural dynamic, because what happens over time is that when districts get new money, they add staff. And the reason they add staff is because it's a lot easier to add a few staff members than to say, I'm going to raise compensation by 5%, right? It's a smaller bite and also more reversible. But we've added over this period of time, we've increased spending by 30%, but it's almost all gone to adding staff. And only a quarter of those new staff were teachers. We would argue that the answer is not to raise compensation by this amount across all teachers, but instead to think differently about how to distribute teacher compensation over the educator workforce, paying some teachers much, much more, and creating a career path that enables teachers to move, as in other professions, through levels of compensation. The way to do that is going to be to think differently about who does what in schools, because it's simple math. The amount you spend on compensation, if you're paying everybody roughly the same, is just the number of teachers you have times the compensation you get. But what if we broke away from that traditional model of one teacher, one classroom, instead of a picture like this, where every teacher has somewhere between 22 and 35 students? You have a team-based model that enables fuller and bolder vision for change. We work a lot with two of these organizations that promote team-based, that help districts and states move toward team-based models. And many of you listening to this are probably implementing one of these two, or thinking about implementing opportunity culture, which has a model for supporting schools to move toward multi-classroom leaders, where a teacher leader supports the coordination of work across a number of classrooms, where students and teachers move flexibly. And then we have the Arizona State University Next Generation Workforce model, in which you have a combination of educators collaborating together over educating a group of students, often in a single grade level, but it can be implemented in a single subject and so on. And these educators include differentiated roles, including paid teacher residents, high dosage tutors, learning facilities, and so on. The idea here is that it's not one size fits all teaching job. It's a more fluid organization. Getting to scale with some of these things, and even getting started with some of these efforts, has to happen in the context of state leadership. We've seen pockets of these sorts of changes over the decades that I've been doing this work. And what we so often see is that the little pieces and parts that get implemented don't scale because the money goes away and the underlying structures haven't changed in order to support them. So many of your states are looking at your districts who are dealing with significant financial crisis. ESSER dollars are flowing or have stopped. Declining enrollment has continued over this period of time. There's huge pressure on teacher compensation, and district leaders are struggling with huge student needs. So it might seem incredibly inconsistent to be talking about highfalutin ideas about reimagining the teaching role in that context. How in the world do you pick your head up from all of that work and say, no, we need to try something new? We would argue that this is exactly the moment in which states need to play a leadership role to support trying something new, because in this moment, when we look at district budgets and we see that 80 to 90% of those budgets are spent on compensation for teachers and other educators and support staff, how do we get out of the financial crisis without thinking deeply about how we structure that spending on staff? And how do we address the constant and increasing turnover without addressing the fundamentals of that job? So the state role is to create space and cover for this critical work that needs to happen for the future of our nation's schools. And Ventura will talk a little bit about how you can do that work.
Great. Thanks so much, Karen. So that lays out the vision for what we think is going to be required to really get to a teaching job version 2.0 that allows us to think about not just recruitment and retention, but again, fundamentally changing the work for teachers and ultimately the impact for kids. As Karen said earlier, we're talking about the teaching job, but there are going to be a lot of ways that school is currently organized that are going to be really important to think about, because these are the ways that teachers operate every day. So if you have rigid class size requirements, on the one hand, you can understand why those things exist because you want to cap class sizes. That's fine. But if there's not enough flexibility about how you can organize different types of courses and numbers based on just the way that you might organize this new vision for teaching, that might become a barrier. So you're going to have to look at things like class sizes, compensation, which right now is mostly lockstep and really focused on years of experience in education. Not saying those things are bad, but you want to maybe have more flexible ways to think about how people can progress in their career and earn additional compensation. So those are just two. You see others on here as well about, again, how schedules happen, teacher assignment, to work with different students, expanding learning beyond school walls, and then leveraging efficiencies and coherence, perhaps with use of technology or outside partners. So these are just some examples of operational shifts that are going to be required as part of the work. And what we'll see, on the next slide is that with these shifts, it does require changes to some core fundamental ways of like compensation systems, school designs, learning programs, staffing, teaming models, which can feel overwhelming. However, we think it's also really important to pick your entry points. Like there's a lot to do. This is, laying out sort of a broader vision. But it's going to be really important in this moment of leadership to also identify critical first steps, critical actions that are going to be early wins and build momentum. And we'll start laying out the specific roles for state leaders on this next slide. So the first recommendation may seem obvious, but we think it's critical to move this work. So as Karen said, many states currently are focused on recruitment and retention of staff, which again makes a lot of sense, but very few are looking at the actual structure of the teaching role and how we actually have to address that core structure to get at the core of why people are leaving. We think governors and their education teams are well positioned to coalesce support for needing to reimagine the role of teachers and to build a shared vision. We laid out at the beginning of this presentation what part of our shared vision is with the different stakeholders we work with. We would imagine that there's a version of those slides that is about your specific state. Like, what is it about the value proposition in your state that's going to resonate most with your constituents? We also think that, this work is going to require bold leadership and partnership with key stakeholders, including teachers' unions. Like, this isn't something that's done too, but really when we talk to teachers' unions across the country, there's a lot of energy to think about, a more rewarding, sustainable role. I think the work is going to be about the details and how we get there, but going to be really, really important as we think about other states that have had, laser-like focus. I mean, we think of corollaries like in Louisiana, where they, years ago really identified literacy as the focus area, made it a priority. And in that way, you're able to bring not only different stakeholders together, but really think about all of the different levers that you have available through your state education agency, through state funding, through other actions to really align efforts on that work as well. So again, the first one, articulate a shared vision. We think leadership is going to be really, really critical in this moment. As you think about, the operational shifts that we talked about in previous slides, it's going to be really important to assess to what degree some of your state policies promote or hinder innovation. In other words, does your state have specific requirements for class size, compensation models, other factors? In some cases, states offer the flexibility, and it's important to take a look at, where your state is at. So in some cases, again, states will offer the flexibility, but perhaps limits exist at the local level through either local policies, collective bargaining agreements, or district perception of what is and is not allowed by the state. Many times when we work with districts, they're saying, actually, the state doesn't allow us to work. And you're actually like, why? Show me where in the state law or policy, and they can't. But there's this perception that the state doesn't allow things. So it's really important to be, for that part to be of the work as well. So, you want to understand where your state policies are, as we talked about, in alignment to these key operational shifts. And then again, another obvious one, but what we find is really important is, what's your theory of action, or really like, what's your approach for this work? Like, how are you planning for change to happen? So if you create a vision and a priority, for example, and then provide technical assistance and resources to district, and then assess progress and share learning, like that's an example of like, what is the logic model that you're going to use in terms of the inputs, the things that you directly want to, impact, and then the types of results that you think it could lead to. So we think it's really important to spend time articulating that clearly. And then finally, like I said, that there is a lot of work to do. And so it's going to be important to pick what we call do now actions. So there are actions that, yes, you have this broader vision, but where do you start? How do you build momentum? We think it's also a great opportunity to think about, how do you prioritize the levers at your state education agency, for example, around grant making and monitoring, technical assistance, things that agencies do. How do you align those to this laser focused goal of reimagining the teaching role? So again, a couple of ideas. We do have some other supports. Like on this next slide, you'll see at ERS, we developed a policy self-assessment that states can use. So it's on our website, and then we'll share information about it. But it starts with, what are the district actions that they may want to take? So if we're talking about some of these more flexible grouping of students and team-based approaches, we start with the state actions, with the district actions, and then we say, okay, if we want to catalyze this kind of change, what's the state role? Like, what are the policies? What are the levers? And so what this allows you to do is connect your state role to district priorities and work, and then do a self-assessment of, where are we in our state? So for example, if what you're trying to do is, incentivize and learn from rapid innovation. So does your state have innovation zones where there's more flexibility, for schools to try things, or sort of teaching schools or lab schools? And it's okay if you don't, because that might not be the right strategy. But the bottom line is, you're taking stock of, for these district actions, what are the conditions we have to set at the state level, and where are we in setting those conditions? Great. And so this is an example of how you can assess your conditions. So creating, we're fine. Creating this type of work, though, is going to really require some incentives and also support to districts for innovation. So, we would really say it's going to be critical to figure out, do you have new or existing grants that support the transition to innovative models? And again, what I would double down on is, it's not always about finding new money. Sometimes it's about understanding how your state education agency uses its lever of grant making to distribute discretionary funds, either federal dollars or state dollars. And so part of what you want to do is like, make sure you're aligning and to be very concrete and clear, that your SEA staff know that if this is a priority for the state, how are you using those grant making opportunities, for example, to tailor them for supporting this work? And again, there may be new grants or new revenue as well. But one is, we need funding for this. Districts need to be able to dedicate time, space, and in some cases, initially it might be more expensive because you're layering on or trying things while you're running your system. But eventually that, that is a learning that you need to start replacing some of the other core ways of working into new, different ways. So finding existing grants to support, also technical assistance is going to be really important to do a few things. One is we don't oftentimes think about teachers as a resource, and therefore we don't often spend time analyzing our state or local data to figure out how are we aligning this really critical resource to the needs in our district. So for example, who has access to our strongest teachers? What courses are they teaching? What are their, group sizes versus others? Are we creating opportunities for these teachers to support younger teachers? So really taking stock of your resource use of teachers is going to be really, really critical. And then additionally, you're going to need technical support for these districts to think about, not the entire change process, but where do they start and how do they go about designing something different to learn from, to innovate related to these organizational shifts. So again, we think that the incentives, the resources, and the technical assistance are really, really critical for moving this work. And then on this next slide, we see that, while you are engaged in innovation, we have to measure progress, like how is it going? And so really deliberate about making sure that district leaders have a framework and a mindset for what we call strategic system return on investment. So if you're trying something and you're laying out a logic model at the district level and you're going to, really try to shift practice, how are you measuring if it's working or not, both from the implementation, but also from, some output. So you're going to want to make sure you're thinking about that, capturing that, collecting stakeholder feedback in the districts, and then working to continuously improve. It's not a, we tried it once and it worked or didn't work, but how do you continuously improve, in the directions and the things that you're trying to impact? How are we lifting up lessons learned, with likely districts or networks of other districts to really share learnings, like, support one another, providing, again, technical assistance, grants, tools to scale when there's opportunity to do so. And we think that, when we talk about innovation, it doesn't mean that districts aren't still responsible for meeting the needs of students. You absolutely are. And so it is continuing to hold schools and districts accountable for student outcomes and sharing data about how schools and districts are doing. So with those two in particular, we'll see on the next slide that there are some examples of places that are doing parts of this work. And so that's the good news. We don't have to start from zero. So Maryland, a few years ago passed the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which is a very ambitious vision for their education system and really centers the role of teachers and how the teaching job needs to look very different in that state. It creates a career ladder model, model that includes differentiated roles and leadership pathways, but and also really important, it creates additional funding at the state level to support districts, not only in redesigning, but in getting to this new vision over a series of years, and also technical assistance that the state is providing districts on how to do that. In Texas, we have different pieces of legislation that get at this vision of a different teacher role, but the teacher incentive allotment is a really interesting approach where it provides direct funding to districts that each using high-performing teachers that they assign to higher needs schools. So it's about creating incentives, right, here at the state level. Texas is another state that's doing a lot of work also on technical assistance and is working with many districts across that state to think about things like strategic staffing and strategic scheduling. So the innovation that I talked about earlier in the presentation, Texas is an example of a state that is really leaning into that. And in Tennessee, we have many examples of grow your own, but this is to the model that Karen was talking about earlier, the different pathways and trying to expand the number of pathways. The state is providing technical assistance to districts who want to implement their own grow your own teacher residency programs. And so that it becomes a no-cost pathway into the profession, and thus trying to open, pathways for different types of folks who may be considering the education role. So some examples here, they're promising practices, and I think there's a lot, to continue learning and innovating on in these states and others as well. So we know that's a lot, but want to just provide on this next slide kind of a summary, of where we think state leaders can create the conditions. There are really three main levers I look at: guidance and accountability, incentives and support, statewide data tools. And starts with, on guidance and accountability, again, create a vision with research-based guiding framework. So what are those key shifts that we're going to need to make and why? And then looking at your state to make sure you're creating flexibilities for things like class size and staffing ratios, rigid seat time requirements, teacher of record policies. Some of the models that Karen talked about earlier, it's teams of teachers. So it's not just one working with, so you have to really have flexibility to be able to design differently. On the incentives and support, it really is dedicated funding to support transition and innovative models. We talked a lot about grant making, the tools and technical assistance, which again is going to be key to help districts have partnership to support design and implementation of new coherent school designs, and then investing in research to study effectiveness, highlight best practices, and finally, data. States vary in the kind of data that they collect, but we have many states that have great data sets. Really important to understand for districts, where are you starting from? Again, think of your teachers as the most important resource, and you have to think about how are you utilizing that resource in alignment to your district priorities. So sounds simple, and the data is there, but it takes work to really make sure that you're seeing not only how you're currently using this really important resource, but where are you not, or how could you leverage it differently? That feels like it's also a really important part of the story. And on the final slide, we invite you to visit our website. We've done a lot of work, not only as an organization, but with many across the country and coalition to really think about what this new, vision for teaching roles could look like. We have case studies on our website. We have, entry points that people can think about. And at the end of the day, we just invite you to reach out in supporting you in your critical role of taking leadership. We want to support you. We know the governors and your teams are critical in moving this work forward. And so we really look forward to continuing to partner with many of you as you center and prioritize this work in your state. So thank you very much, and we look forward to connecting with you all soon.
Well, thank you, Karen and Ventura, for sharing your insights and expertise with our viewers today. Viewers, please note that all reports and resources, including the PowerPoint discussed during this webinar, will be attached to the recording once it's released on the NGA website. Thanks again to the ERS team, and until next time, thanks to all of you for tuning in. Have a great day.